Picture this scene. It's 7:30 in the morning at one of the most famous royal castles in the world, and the massive gates are being locked shut. Thousands of tourists who plan their entire vacations around visiting Balmoral Castle are being turned away, confused and disappointed. The official reason given was bad weather, but that wasn't the real truth. The shocking reality was that almost two-thirds of the castle's room attendants had walked out the night before, leaving behind empty rooms that desperately needed cleaning and a royal household in complete chaos. What drove these hard-working people to abandon their jobs at one of the most prestigious addresses in Scotland? The answer will absolutely blow your mind, because it reveals a dark side of royal life that the palace never wanted you to see. We're talking about working conditions so bad that people would rather sleep on the streets than spend another night in the servants' quarters. We're talking about rules so ridiculous that grown adults had to bow to empty rooms. And we're talking about a pay system so unfair that it would make you angry just hearing about it. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on Balmoral Castle and show you exactly why dozens of maids, gardeners, and other workers decided they couldn't take any more. This isn't just a story about one castle. It's a story about how power and tradition can create a system that treats people like they don't matter, and how sometimes the only way to fight back is to simply walk away. Balmoral Castle sits in the Scottish Highlands like something out of a fairy tale, with its white granite walls sparkling against the rolling hills and mountains. The castle was built in 1856 by Prince Albert, who personally designed many of its features, including a clock tower that rings in a special musical key, so it won't frighten the royal horses. The estate covers more than 53,000 acres, making it larger than the entire city of San Francisco. But behind those beautiful granite walls, a much darker story has been unfolding for decades. This is the story of the people who keep the castle running. The invisible army of workers who scrub floors, tend gardens, and maintain the hundreds of rooms that make up this royal retreat. These are people whose names you'll never know, whose faces you'll never see in official photographs, but whose labor makes it possible for the royal family to enjoy their private paradise. The working conditions at Balmoral have been harsh for generations. Maids start their days at 6 in the morning, beginning in the oldest kitchen where they spend hours polishing over 200 pieces of silver until each one gleams like a mirror. They carry heavy tea kettles along cold stone hallways, being careful not to wake the royal dogs that sleep throughout the castle. They peel 18 kilograms of potatoes for lunch, then change into fresh uniforms to prepare afternoon tea at exactly 4 o'clock. After tea service ends, these same maids have to clean muddy hunting boots and work gear from the day's outdoor activities. Most nights, they don't reach their tiny attic bedrooms until nearly 10 o'clock, having worked 15-hour shifts with no overtime pay. The old employee manual actually contained a line that said, "Loyalty is its own reward," as if the honor of serving the royal family should be enough to make up for the exhausting work and terrible pay. One former maid described it as giving your life to a shadow because the royals barely acknowledged their existence, yet expected perfect service at all times. She said that in all her months of working there, nobody ever said thank you for the backbreaking work she did every single day. But perhaps the most insulting rule of all was the one about curtsying to empty rooms. Every morning, maids were required to curtsy not just when they saw a member of the royal family, but also when they entered any room that a royal person had recently left. Even if the prince or princess had walked out just seconds before, the maid had to bow deeply to the empty space where they had been standing. This 150-year-old rule was supposedly meant to honor the spirit of the royal who had just been there, but to the maids, it felt like they were curtsying to ghosts. During busy times like the annual Gillies Ball, staff members had performed this degrading ritual over 60 times in a single evening. Some maids bruised their knees so badly from all the curtsying that supervisors had to hand out bandages along with serving trays. The pay situation was even worse than the working conditions. In 1983, the lowest level housemaid earned just $18,000 per year before taxes. That was barely $4,000 more than the average British worker made, despite the fact that she worked 60 hours per week and lived at the castle full-time. It took 3 years to get promoted to first housemaid, but that promotion only raised her pay to $21,500. Meanwhile, male gamekeepers on the same estate earned about $26,000, showing that even within the unfair pay system, women were treated worse than men. Many female workers left after just 1 year because they simply couldn't afford to stay, even though they were getting free housing in the castle's attic rooms. Those attic rooms were another source of misery for the workers. Until 1994, maids slept in tiny spaces that got so cold in winter that temperatures dropped to just 4 degrees Celsius at night. Hot water was only available for 30 minutes each morning. So if you missed that narrow window, you had to wash with ice-cold water or not wash at all. In August 1992, when the electrical system broke during a rainstorm, maids had to dry their bed sheets by hanging them over the massive kitchen stoves while wearing gloves to protect their hands from the heat. It wasn't until 1995, after an official audit finally pointed out how terrible the living conditions were, that Balmoral upgraded the plumbing and provided proper blankets for the workers. The silence rule made everything even more oppressive. Workers were forbidden from speaking unless a member of the royal family spoke to them first. In July 1986, one maid was dusting furniture when she accidentally overheard Prince Charles whispering something to Princess Diana. Another servant immediately warned her to act deaf, and the next morning she received a written warning for listening to the conversation. There was a strict policy that if you were caught registering what the royals said twice, you would be fired immediately and lose your $250 end-of-season bonus. Many workers learned to communicate with each other using hand signals, especially during breakfast service when the royals were most likely to be talking. The halls of Balmoral became quieter than a library, not because of respect, but because of fear. Everyone was watching everyone else, and every moment of silence meant survival for another day. Even something as basic as cleaning the carpets became a source of suffering. Queen Elizabeth hated the sound of vacuum cleaners, so she banned them completely from the castle. Instead, every morning, 2 maids had to get down on their hands and knees and push small horsehair brushes across every single carpet in the building. Just cleaning one hallway took 45 minutes of scrubbing on hands and knees. The dust got so thick that maids had to rinse their work aprons twice each day. In 1990, the head housekeeper calculated that this change added 9 hours of work every single day, but the pay stayed exactly the same. Staff members complained that their wrists hurt so badly from all the scrubbing that they couldn't hold eating utensils properly during their brief meal breaks. But nobody dared complain out loud because they knew that speaking up would mean losing their jobs immediately. The breaking point began in 2024 when social media gave workers a new way to share their experiences without revealing their identities. A housekeeper posted a review on a job website, calling Balmoral's management toxic. She described bosses who yelled at maids in front of guests, who punished workers for missing tiny specks of dust on picture frames, and who took away break time as punishment for minor mistakes. The review revealed that maids were still being paid just £10.90 per hour, which was 60 pence less than the real living wage in the United Kingdom. Overtime work beyond 48 hours per week often went completely unpaid. That week, 5 maids quit their jobs, leaving rooms dirty until 11 at night because there wasn't enough staff to clean them. Other former workers began replying to the review, backing up her story and sharing their own experiences. Internal surveys later showed that 68% of staff who left Balmoral said that bullying or disrespect was the main reason they couldn't continue working there. The situation became even more outrageous when someone leaked anonymous payroll files in October 2024. The numbers were shocking and revealed the true extent of inequality at the royal estate. A senior royal aide earned $146,000 per year and got to live in comfortable private quarters. Meanwhile, a maid earned just $19,500 per year and had to share a tiny room with another worker. That meant the pay gap between the highest and lowest workers was more than 7 times, despite the fact that the maids were doing some of the hardest and most essential work at the castle. During the same period, the sovereign grant, which is money given to the royal family by the British government, rose to $85.9 million. That was an increase of 41% over 10 years, but workers' wages had barely gone up 6% during the same time. The gardening situation became equally desperate. Between early 2024 and mid-2025, the gardening team at King Charles's other estate fell apart completely. Out of 12 workers, only 1 person stayed. The rest walked away from jobs that looked beautiful from the outside, but were actually physically destructive and financially unfair. These gardeners worked up to 60 hours per week, sweating over 15 acres of themed gardens that were visited by 40,000 tourists each year. They earned around $22,000 annually, which worked out to just £7.75 per hour after taxes. That was barely better than minimum wage, despite the fact that they were maintaining world-famous gardens that brought in millions of dollars in tourist revenue. The final straw came on July 5, 2025, when one gardener tore his shoulder while hauling 180 kilograms of compost by himself. He wasn't given proper sick pay and was forced to survive on basic government benefits of just £116 per week. 9 days later, nearly the entire team quit together in protest. Internal emails that leaked showed that King Charles often left handwritten notes demanding impossible tasks, like pulling up every single weed overnight or replanting 700 flowers in just 3 days before he returned from a trip. The gardeners felt like they were being treated as slaves rather than skilled professionals. King Charles had expanded the organic gardens and added 30 beehives because he wanted every meal at Balmoral to be carbon neutral. It was an admirable environmental goal, but it came at a terrible human cost. The gardeners weren't allowed to use tractors or modern equipment. Everything had to be done by hand, using only rainwater and organic methods. Each day, workers had to make around 90 wheelbarrow trips just to move soil and compost around the massive gardens. One man developed carpal tunnel syndrome from lifting over 200 kilograms of compost every single day. The king's handwritten notes telling them to remove all chemicals by sunrise were pinned to the potting shed wall like military orders from another world. The hypocrisy became clear when people realized that King Charles's personal fortune was over $1.1 billion, yet he was paying his essential workers barely enough to survive. It would cost only $187,000 per year to raise all the workers' wages to fair levels. That's less than what the royal family spent to resurface their private helicopter landing pad. The moment that made everything boil over came in June 2023, when a young maid who called herself Heather Glenn shared her story on an online forum. She had requested emergency leave because her mother was going into surgery, but her supervisor denied the request. Instead, she was told she had to stay at work and starch Princess Kate's bed linens. Heather quit that same day and posted screenshots showing that she had only used 2 out of her 10 allowed vacation days that year. Her story went viral with over 11,000 people commenting and sharing their own experiences of workplace abuse. 2 weeks later, 5 more maids handed in their resignations. The palace managers had no choice but to bring in temporary workers from Aberdeen, and they had to pay these replacement workers $19 per hour, almost double what they had been paying the loyal employees who had stayed. This showed that they could afford to pay fair wages all along, but had simply chosen not to. The mass walkout on August 4th, 2025, was a culmination of generations of abuse and exploitation. When almost 2/3 of the room attendants left the night before, they weren't just quitting their jobs. They were making a statement that no amount of royal prestige was worth sacrificing their dignity and physical health. The official story about storm damage was a convenient cover-up, but the real truth was that Balmoral Castle couldn't function without the workers it had been treating terribly for so long. For the first time since 2001, one of Britain's most famous tourist attractions had to close its doors to the public because it simply didn't have enough staff to operate safely. Even the traditional Gillies Ball, which was supposed to be a special night when workers and royals came together as equals, revealed the deep class divisions that still existed. Workers received different types of invitations based on their rank in the hierarchy. Those with gold-edged invitations were considered more important than those with plain paper invitations. At exactly midnight, all the royal family members would leave the party, and everyone else had to bow silently as they departed. It was supposed to be the one night of the year when workers could call the king by his first name, but even that small gesture of equality was tightly controlled and limited. The stories of workers who tried to speak out in previous decades show how dangerous it has always been to challenge the royal system. In 1988, a French magazine published an article based on information from a young maid who had worked just 8 weeks at Balmoral. She was paid around $10,000 for sharing what she had seen behind the royal walls, which was more than she would have earned in 8 years of regular work. The palace was furious and launched an internal investigation of all 348 staff members who had worked that season. They changed security rules overnight and started requiring all new workers to sign strict secrecy agreements tied to the Official Secrets Act. Everyone understood what that meant. Talk to the press, and your career is over forever. Paul Burrell, who had been Princess Diana's personal butler, tried to write a book in 2003 about his experiences. Before the book was even published, police raided his home and found 342 royal items. He was arrested and faced serious criminal charges. But in a surprising twist, Queen Elizabeth herself stepped in and said she remembered giving him permission to keep some of the items. The case collapsed, and Burrell's book went on to sell over 500,000 copies. But the message was clear. Even when you have permission to tell your story, the royal family will find ways to punish you for speaking the truth. The 2024 and 2025 mass resignations represent something completely new in the long history of Balmoral Castle. For the first time, workers weren't just quietly enduring terrible conditions or sneaking away one at a time. They organized together, shared their stories publicly, and forced the royal family to face the consequences of their treatment of working people. The fact that temporary replacement workers had to be paid almost double the regular wages proves that fair compensation was always possible. The royal family simply chose to exploit their workers' loyalty and desperation rather than pay them what they deserved. The leaked payroll information showing that maids earned less than $20,000, while senior aides earned over $140,000, reveals the shocking inequality that exists even within the royal household. These aren't just numbers on a page. They represent real people who couldn't afford proper health care, couldn't save money for emergencies, and couldn't provide for their families despite working 15-hour days at one of the wealthiest addresses in the world. The environmental goals that King Charles set for his gardens might sound admirable, but they became another form of worker exploitation when they were used to justify forcing people to do backbreaking manual labor for poverty wages. There's nothing environmentally sustainable about a system that destroys human bodies and spirits in the name of organic gardening. The rule about curtsy into empty rooms might seem like a silly tradition, but it represents something much deeper and more harmful. It's a constant reminder that workers are expected to show respect and deference even when there's nobody around to appreciate it. It's a way of conditioning people to accept that their dignity matters less than maintaining royal traditions, no matter how pointless those traditions might be. The silence rule that prevented workers from speaking unless spoken to first created an atmosphere of fear and isolation that made it almost impossible for people to support each other or organize for better conditions. When you can't even talk to your co-workers during the day, it becomes much harder to realize that everyone is suffering from the same problems. The terrible living conditions in the attic rooms, with no heating and limited hot water, showed how little the royal family cared about the basic human needs of the people who served them. These weren't just inconveniences. They were health hazards that made people sick and forced them to live in conditions that would be considered unacceptable in any other modern workplace. The mass exodus of 2024 and 2025 finally forced the royal family to confront the reality that their system of exploitation couldn't continue forever. When workers have other options and ways to share their experiences publicly, they won't continue to accept treatment that belongs in the 19th century, not the 21st. The fact that Balmoral had to close to tourists because there weren't enough workers left shows that even the most powerful and privileged families in the world depend on ordinary working people to maintain their lifestyle. Without maids to clean the rooms, gardeners to maintain the grounds, and cooks to prepare the meals, even a royal castle becomes just an empty building. This story matters because it reveals how systems of power and privilege really work in the modern world. It shows that behind every beautiful facade, there are often people working in terrible conditions to maintain appearances. It demonstrates that loyalty and tradition can be used as weapons to keep people accepting unfair treatment. But most importantly, it shows that change is possible when people refuse to accept exploitation and stand together to demand better treatment. The maids and gardeners who walked away from Balmoral didn't just improve their own lives. They forced one of the most traditional institutions in the world to face the reality that their old ways of doing things are no longer acceptable. The royal family's wealth comes from centuries of ordinary people's labor, and the workers who maintain their estates today deserve to be treated with dignity and paid fairly for their essential work. The mass resignations at Balmoral prove that even the most powerless people can force change when they have the courage to walk away from systems that exploit them. What do you think about these shocking revelations about working conditions at Balmoral Castle? Did any of these stories surprise you, or do they match what you expected about life behind royal walls? Have you ever worked in a situation where you felt exploited or undervalued, and how did you handle it? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because this story is about more than just one castle or one royal family. It's about how power works in our society and how ordinary people can fight back against unfair treatment. If this investigation into the hidden world of royal employment shocked you as much as it shocked me, please hit that like button to show your support for the brave workers who spoke out about these conditions. Your likes help this video reach more people who need to know the truth about what really happens behind the scenes at these prestigious locations. Make sure you're subscribed to our channel and ring that notification bell, because we're always working to uncover the stories that powerful people don't want you to know. We investigate everything from celebrity scandals to political corruption to workplace exploitation, and we need your support to keep doing this important work. Share this video with anyone who's interested in royal news, workers' rights, or just wants to understand how the other half really lives. Thanks for watching, and remember that every time you support content like this, you're helping to shine a light on injustices that would otherwise stay hidden in the shadows.